Hi, this is Dr. Clare Steffen. Welcome back. I'm here today to talk with you some more about cognitions of choice. And today specifically, we're going to look at the opportunity to create alternatives and think about the different ways in which you might do that in life. Remember that cognitions of choice are about creating a philosophy for living. And here's just a little information about me and my background. I'm a psychologist, but I'm also a certified drug and alcohol counselor. Been doing this work for approximately 35, 40 years. Also, I'm a national board certified counselor, and I have certification as a natural health professional, and also I have the coaching credentials as a life coach, wellness coach, and business coach. And so if you've watched some of my other videos, you know that I've worked in many different settings with people of all ages. And so the reason we look at these cognitions of choice and why I develop them is because it's a way for us to consider how to create these traits. We probably already possess some of them, or to varying degrees, but we can strengthen them and we can improve on our life because of it. And so everything that I'm talking about here is really about those dispositions or those traits that you already have, and that to be thinking about them in terms of how they drive choice, or how if you strengthen these, you might open the opportunity or open that door for more choices to come your way in life, or to make the choices in life a little easier. So when we're talking about dispositions, we're talking about the temperament that you have, perhaps that you were born with, or things that have influenced that in life. There's a lot of situations in life that can impact disposition, some of them positive, some of them not positive experiences. But we're also looking at our way of being. So when we break down traits, we're talking about abilities. There are skills, our thinking styles, our learning styles. And we can look at this in terms of strengths or limitations. And then we also look at it in terms of personality characteristics. So it's the qualities, the percepts, or ways of seeing things. And it's our self-view and our worldview. So this is what we want to impact, when we're using our cognitions of choice, to be able to develop that as part of our philosophy for living, so that when we're in situations where choice presents itself, we won't have to struggle so much with the choice because we already have a pretty finely tuned way of seeing our opportunities for choice. Okay, so when we're talking about these dispositional traits that we want to develop, it allows us to create this philosophy for living, and it can help us challenge some of these old constructs that get in the way of us sometimes being healthy. Or sometimes we miss out on opportunities because we get into old thinking patterns. And so we want to be able to exercise new choices. And the cognitions of choice are set up as a level of thinking process. And at the beginning or the initial level, we invite choice. The secondary level, we start to investigate choice. And at that tertiary or third level, we begin to initiate choice. And so by doing this, sometimes it allows us to reduce stress in our life, helps us to develop a more efficient brain process, and we can process choices more effectively because of it. Ideally, what we're doing is creating a wellness philosophy for our lives. And so the other thing I think that having the cognitions of choice offers us is a way to improve confidence. And to be able to specifically improve confidence around choice making or decision making. And the one thing you can count on in life is that there's always going to be change. We're not always ready for it. We don't always like it. We can't always easily accept change. But if we have confidence in our ability to make healthy choices, it makes that process a little easier for us. And so what I've done here is broken down this process in a way that you can think about how might I use these cognitions of choice. And remember, there's 24 different cognitions of choice that make up the philosophy for living. And I'm going to be showing you them one at a time. And today we just are focusing on creating alternatives. And so what I'm looking at here is how do I approach change? And so as we process at these different levels, where we're inviting change, investigating, and initiating change. At that initial level, when we're inviting, we're just exploring. We're opening the door for opportunity to occur. And so in terms of those barrier thoughts that get in the way, what we're trying to change, or approach is fear reduction. We work on becoming more assertive. And we want to make sure that the choices we make are congruent. In other words, what I'm thinking matches up what I'm feeling. Because if we have that more congruent choice, it's less likely that we're going to feel anxiety about the choices that we're making. And so at that secondary level, our approach is to gather up support, whether it's through other people, through organizations, through the skills that we've developed, through learning experiences. There's a lot of opportunity in different places to find support. And so we're now more investigating. And as we do this, we develop more optimism, and we're focused on becoming more respectful just in life towards ourselves and others. And we begin to feel more empowerment. And empowerment is important in life because it gives us that strength to carry on and be more resilient. And at that third level, we're starting to be able to motivate ourselves, and not necessarily rely or depend on outside sources so much to motivate us. And so we're more able to initiate. And as we function at that higher level, we've started to develop integrity, and I'm not saying you didn't have integrity to begin with, it's just more finely tuned. And so maybe we have more resources personally to be able to share and help with others because we have that confidence that we can do that. We maintain dignity for living, and we are truly much more resilient for it. And so the approach to processing choice is that initially, maybe these thoughts are coming up very automatically. Now, specifically, if we're looking at negative thought process, that might be true. And if you're having a problem with self-talk in which you talk to yourself in a way that is negative, you want to correct that. And so we begin to explore about how do we invite that change so that we have more choices that are healthier. So at this point, we may be specifically focused on skills development. And again, at that secondary level, we're starting to investigate much more. And so we're starting to focus on developing strategies. And when I'm talking about the strategies, I'm talking about strategies at a meta level. What that means is I'm starting to think about my thinking, and I'm starting more to think about my feelings. And not in a ruminating or negative way. I'm thinking about them in a strategic way in which I can exercise more change opportunities. At the third level, I've accomplished all of this. I'm starting to think much more at a conscious level. And so I moved away from that automatic thought process where I'm creating opportunities and choices and changes coming about in a much more conscious way. And so I'm now able to initiate. And so this becomes much more integrated, and it's more part of my temperament or disposition. And so that's what we're working at that level. So that automatic thought process, can sometimes be very deterministic or very mechanistic, and so at level one, we use the mnemonic. Change happens as an opportunity to invite corrective experiences. And so this cognitive tool is used to address those automatic thoughts that are driven by habits or forced choices. Those kind of choices are simple, sometimes yes or no, or they're a closed response pattern. And this can result in very discrete outcomes or leave us in the same place, where we've always been or feeling stuck. And so it is very important to start to exercise, choice in a different way so that we can create healthier choices for ourselves. And so the approach at this level is much more cognitive behavioral. And so we're looking at how do my thoughts connect with my feelings? How does that impact my behavior? And most importantly, how do I impact my belief system? And so we want to close the gap between that split between what I'm thinking and feeling. And so, with the gap there, we might experience conflict. We may feel discomfort. We may feel anxiety or some unwanted experience. And so we really do want to close that gap. And a cognitive behavioral approach where perhaps you're tracking and journaling and documenting and keeping record of those thoughts so that you can really impact them in a positive way. Okay, and so as I said, this initially is, a deterministic kind of outcome when we're just focused on automatic thoughts. And so those involve those yes/no answers, or maybe we're thinking in a win or lose kind of way. It might be things are right or wrong, and it's more of a narrow way of thinking. That things are tolerable or intolerable, or that I only have two choices, A or B. And, it tends to be that these kinds of choices evoke stereotypes, or they may be involved in prejudiced or biased thinking. And they're habitual kinds of ways of thinking. And so, I think, we can take situations in which we've developed habits and open the door for more choice and more opportunity as a result of it. So today, the specific cognition of choice that we're focused on is creating alternatives. And, we have this little symbol here at the top. Some people like to think of things in a visual way. And so just kind of recording that in your brain so that that comes up automatically for you could be helpful. Or this other image of the woman here with her magnifying glass, and she's searching and looking for different alternatives. And basically the definition here is that the possibility of choosing between two or more different things or courses of actions, and there is a possibility to have too many choices in life, but generally speaking, when we're talking about creating alternatives, what we're looking for is to change the situation where we're not thinking in such a way that we're paying attention to the healthy alternatives that we have, or possibility for more alternatives to be available to us. Just as a reminder, this is the decision wheel, and the decision wheel, is looking at everything in life is relational, and that whether we're talking about our relation to ourselves or others, or environments, everything happens in a multidimensional way. And these initial choices that we're talking about could be focused on sustainability, and so we want to filter through our choice makings to keep that in mind, that we want to make choices that will allow us to sustain health and well-being. Secondary level choices move to more self-empowerment, and our outside ring there is choices that are focused on achievement. And it's not that they don't interact with one another or impact one another in an interactive way. Some of these images here just are meant didactically to help us visualize and think about this in a way so that we can learn the information. So now, as we move into that secondary level, as I've said, we're focused on metacognition. And so the mnemonic in this case is that change happens as an opportunity to investigate. And we're going to engage critical thinking and experiences that we've had. So change happens as an opportunity to investigate critical thinking and experiences. So critical thinking allows us to use our logic. There's much of this in our culture here, in our westernized culture, that is logic driven. But I also am a proponent of using our creative thinking process. And so critical thinking involves the ability to apply a higher level of awareness, to examine options in an open manner by implementing strategies to orchestrate change, movement towards acceptance of what we cannot change, and the development of a new choice. So it's really an important skill to have critical thinking and to be able to apply it quickly, in some situations, or to be able to use it in a way that allows us to think more deeply and process our multiple options, that might be present. And so this kind of helps us move in the direction of mindfulness, and so that we're in the present and we're calm and we're looking through, our opportunities in a way that allows us to exercise them most comfortably. So there's increased awareness, there's openness to feel and be able to tolerate discord. So we can stay in it long enough to be able to not just rush into making a decision. And so that we can apply self-nurturance. And if you're working with a client, as a coach or a counselor, allowing your client to be able to develop this tolerance for discord helps them to truly become more able to apply this way to investigate and openly become more aware and be more comfortable with exploring their options. Sometimes people have had trauma in their background and they're not really familiar with the idea of creating options, or they may not feel as comfortable with exploring their options because that inner voice might be telling them it's not okay. And so there's a lot to override in terms of that barrier thinking. And so the different kinds of choices that apply in this case when we're involving more critical thinking and that metacognition is it's more expansive. There's A, B, C, D choices. They're more assertive type choices. And it may involve meditation or being able to apply the art of negotiation. And it allows us to build on our self-esteem, become more aware and connecting to ourselves at a deeper level. And in some cases, these types of choices might be more serious and involve life and death situations. And so it is extremely important to be able to think critically. It allows for more independence in life. So, as I said earlier, I support not only the critical thinking, but the development of creative thinking and sustainable kinds of choices in life. And so as we move to level 3, we're thinking at a much more conscious level. We're not using just that automatic habitual thinking process, and we're creating and choosing our choices. And we can think about things that maybe are out of our control, but we can learn to accept them, and be able to focus on creating harmony and balance so that we can redirect any kind of fear-based thinking. And we open the door or that choice channel to be thinking more in terms of abundance and that we're really resilient. So in this case, the mnemonic is conscious hope is an opportunity to initiate and create empowerment. So as we learn to initiate, we feel much more empowered. And we are more hopeful, truly. So all of this allows us to create sustainability, in times when things are changing and maybe not so secure. It is important to be able to create sustainability in our lives. And this, having this status engages us in a way that we understand and support harmony and life balance. We can open the door to feel more joy. And I think, if we always approach life with acceptance, forgiveness, and love, we're able to exercise more conscious choice. So we feel more in balance, and so we're able to think more holistically. And it allows us to go to a place that is more transcendent. And so when I'm talking about acceptance, forgiveness, and love, it isn't a blanket statement if somebody wrongs you that you should just accept it. It's more acceptance of yourself and the things that may have harmed you or hurt you in life, and recognition for that as a human being in the moment you did the best you could, that you're open to learning new things, and that you can't always forgive the act, and sometimes you truly can't forgive the person, but you can forgive yourself for being in that situation. Sometimes people who have had experiences that were traumatic or they were victimized in some ways carry on in blaming themselves, even though it's not logical. And so that forgiveness at various levels is very important. There's just a quick social level of I'm sorry, and I'm not talking necessarily about that. I mean, that's part of social protocol. But we want to be able to forgive at a much deeper level. And some of that is about accepting and understanding people in terms of their life weaknesses or strengths. And so the types of choices involved, when we're looking at more of this creative thinking process and being able to think at a more conscious level, is that it supports harmony, it helps us maintain life balance. These kinds of choices might involve moral dilemmas or spiritual choices. It helps us really connect to our identity at a deeper level. And it is part of this lifelong philosophy that I'm speaking to in creating that. It can allow us to be more empathetic and resilient, you know. And so we've talked a little bit here now about metacognition, and we've talked some about critical thinking, which is part of our cognitive process. And now we're talking some about creative thinking, which is still in the wheelhouse of cognition. So what are the reasons to change? You know, you can list out the pros and cons in any one circumstance as to why you might want to change or consider change. So what would be the benefits of that? And as you're doing that, I want you to think or to consider that all of us are prone to make thinking errors. And these are just 10. There are more examples of thinking errors, but sometimes, you know, these are the things that create that barrier thinking. So we might focus on filtering out the positives, or we engage self-blame, or we think we can read other people's minds, or we catastrophize, or we label in a way that can keep us from moving ahead in life. And so you could look at these all and think, you know, do any of these show up for you as a pattern or more often in your life? And is there any one of them that you need to focus on? And would it be helpful to focus on that one and apply a cognition of choice to help you do that? And so, you know, if the problem is self-blame, maybe creating an alternative and thinking about other possibilities might be helpful in this case. You know, and so when we want to apply the cognitions of choice, and if we're looking at solving a specific problem, this is the 6-step approach to doing that. So you set out to select a problem, or if you're looking to develop a goal, you might want to focus on that instead. And then you generate some options. You brainstorm and not judge. Then you evaluate the options you've come up with. You select the most promising and you implement it. And then you evaluate the outcome. And so then you review it and you reconsider it in light of the outcomes. And then you apply and can start over and continue to adjust it. So, and how you would specifically apply the cognitions of choice is that you identify with each cognition of choice, and you see which one appeals or which one is appropriate. And you examine it from the point of view of any barrier thinking. So then you experiment with a trial and error approach using that specific cognition of choice. And you look at your ability to tolerate. Is there any anxiety that you're experiencing? You know, as you gradually have exposure to, or any kind of, you know, experience with that situation. And then you look at the desired level of comfort that you're trying to seek in that setting. And then you observe, how did you experience it? Were there any patterns of thinking that came up or feelings that you need to look at to track and apply these steps in a way that you can experiment with them? So remember, we're looking to invite change, to be able to investigate it, and then be able to initiate it. And so this is an ongoing process for all of us, and it's a continual process through life. And as I said before, this helps us to develop that philosophy for living. Okay, and so just how to apply them. At level 1, we're looking at automatic thought process, and we're focusing on the acquisition and development of new skills. And so in this approach, we're looking at reviewing, identifying, and experimenting a bit. And the learning approach would be rehearsal. And so we're going to try it over and over again, just so we get very comfortable with it, and maybe in different settings a little bit at a time. And at that level 2, when we're looking at our meta thoughts, as I said earlier, we're starting to develop some strategies. So I'm looking at, how do I think about my thinking, and how do I feel about my thoughts or my feelings? And I may be getting more efficient as I recognize more about my ability to apply not only the cognitions of choice, but to become more aware about my thought process or my feelings. And so in this case, I'm gaining experience. I'm increasing my tolerance for that discord or discomfort so I can stay with it long enough to maintain the change. And I find comfort within myself. And so my approach in this case, my learning approach, is I'm working on maintaining this new learning. And this is very important, because if you stop too soon in a process of change, then you might backslide and not really make the kind of change that you were looking to make. Okay, and so when we're exercising, using these cognitions of choice, and in specific creating alternatives, I wanted to share some exercises with you that you might try, and these will help you develop that thinking in your brain and make it easier for you to access it. And so when we're talking about creating alternatives, we're looking at the possibility of choosing between two or more different things or courses of action. And so here's an example of an exercise that you could do. You could think of this as like the gumball exercise, the kid who's in the candy store. And so in this case, I would recommend that you pretend that you would like a specific color gumball. And so you imagine yourself putting that coin into the gumball machine, and you're trying to get that desired choice, and that, you keep getting a different one, but you have to tolerate it or stay with it until you can really stay with it long enough to get the one that you want. And life can be like that. It's like the Rolling Stones song, that says you don't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you might find that you get what you need. And this is very true in life, isn't it? And so we just stay with it and learn to be able to tolerate the discomfort of not getting what we want. Another example would be to imagine that you're surfing the web, and that you have the world at your fingertips. And so you really have to kind of explore the database in your brain to come up with various choices and different ways to support the outcomes or the data that you found. And so looking at it from, okay, I found this information, I found this possibility, I found this opportunity, I found this option, and then looking at it from those pros and cons perspective. Another one would be creating a brain map, and you could take out the papers and pencils and really kind of map out your ideas and look at them and from that perspective. And another way is to put on your thinking cap and become Mr. Wizard and get as creative as you possibly can, and think of things outside of the box, and imagine yourself having a conversation with Mr. Wizard, and what would he advise? Okay, so those are just some examples. I'm sure you can come up with some more, but I just wanted to give you some ways to think about how would I develop my thinking around these cognitions of choice, and the different ways to make it a little more playful. Okay, and so you might want to track it, and a way to apply this cognition of choice. Oh, I see a little letter off there. Sorry about that. But anyway, you trigger, you look at the triggering situation or event and record that, and what environment it occurred in, what thoughts or feelings you had as a result of it, what was the choice that you were looking at. And in this case, the cognition of choice would be creating alternative. And then you can rate it on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being the most either successful outcome or most uncomfortable outcome, whatever you're looking to record. And then looking at documenting what was the new choice that you came up with or thought to try next. And so ultimately, we want to work on creating this desired philosophy for living, and so I think that I have many different alternatives, which causes me to feel more hopeful. Consequently, I make healthier behavioral choices. I actually believe I am able to create alternatives. My belief allows me to be successful in creating alternatives, and I am committed to wellness and making healthy choices. You can fill in the blanks any way that is comfortable for you. I just wanted to give you an example of how I might use that. But anyway, I appreciate you joining me today, and please stay tuned. We'll continue to talk about the cognitions of choice and how to use them. and how to develop this philosophy for living. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.